Hey everyone, Casella here. A couple quick things before we start. First off, this is episode 27 of A Meal of Thorns, which marks 1 year of the podcast. It's been an extremely rewarding project so far. Big thanks to everyone who's contributed, who's listened, who's told someone else about it. I really appreciate it. I also want to shout out that our parent organization, the Ancillary Review of Books, was recently nominated for the Ignite Critics Circle Award, which I am terribly pleased by, and it's very cool to be sharing the ballot with friend of the pod, Arkady Mitra. Voting is open to the public until August 15th, and it's a very cool list of works and people all up and down, so check it out. Now, an admission. This episode was supposed to be about the 4th Street Fantasy Convention in Minneapolis. I was planning on doing this little mini-series on the conventions and conferences I'm headed to this summer. For not terribly interesting reasons, I didn't get quite enough material for a full episode, but if you are interested, stick around after today's book discussion, and I'll have a few quick words on specfic in the Twin Cities. Also, coffee, it turns out. That will probably be a theme of my travel episodes. Okay, that is it. Thanks for listening. Support the podcast if you can. You know how that works. All right, let's go. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse, he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Hello, and welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Casella Brookins. Each episode, we look at a work of speculative fiction, sometimes broadly, sometimes definitely science fiction, and we ask critics, writers, scholars, or other knowledge and opinion havers to talk to us about what makes it work, what's interesting or problematic or provocative about it, why it matters. Today, I am so excited to talk about C.J. Cherryh's novel 40,000 in Gehenna with author Arkady Martine. Arkady is the author of A Memory Called Empire and A Desolation Called Peace, both of which won the Hugo Award for Best Novel and were winners or finalists for lots of other major awards. Her novella Rose House, which won the Fishing Fortress Science Fiction Award last year, has just been reissued in a new edition from Tor. Check it out. It is very good. And her short story, Three Faces of a Beheading, is a finalist for this year's Hugo Awards. I am making jazz hands at the camera. Arkady is also a historian specializing in the Byzantine Empire, a city planner, and a climate and energy policy analyst. Arkady, so glad to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to get to talk about C.J. Cherryh and especially this book and the other Alliance Union stuff.
Yeah, awesome. I am champing at the bit to talk about Cherryh as well. Before we get into her, though, I was curious, is there anything else you've been reading? Anything interesting?
I have fallen down a spy novel hole, which
Ah.
started out by rereading Nick Herron's Slow Horses books
Mm-hmm.
because friends of mine wanted to watch the television show and I'd read them like back when as in publication order. And then sort of expanding off into, okay, why am I obsessed with terrible spies?
Mm.
What's great about terrible spies? So
Hmm.
this is leading into I am trying to write a novel about terrible spies, which will hopefully not be a terrible spy novel.
Oh, cool. No, that's really fascinating. That's
That's
very
a new
nice.
project. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Any of those like jumping out at you as you're going back to them?
Honestly, there's like this, it's very spoilery.
Mm.
But there's this deeply elegant thing that happens to River Cartwright in sort of book 3, book 4, where you, the reader, River Cartwright's the protagonist of these books, or one of them, where you, the reader, really think that the author has actually gone and done something particularly dramatic with the character that would close off a lot of further lines of action. And you
Mm.
believe this. And I am a very experienced reader and I love craft and I think about it all the time. And I was like, no, he really did that.
Hmm.
I'm absolutely sure he really did it because he had been sufficiently horrible in previous bits of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised
Hmm.
by the resolution. I don't get surprised much anymore. I love it when people can do it. And it's just a beautiful example of making a bargain with the reader that the reader buys into and that is not a cheat when the author breaks it because they have set it up. And I'm trying not to do this without spoilers, but it's a little difficult.
I love that kind of thing. That's great. Yeah, I'm reading like too much as always, like digging out of a big review stack. But two that I've read that have just blown me away in the last week or so here are Pip Adams' Audition. Have you heard of this?
No,
It
tell
was,
me about it.
yeah, originally Australian New Zealand publishing, I think a year or two ago, but it's coming out this summer from Coffee House. It opens just kind of cold on a spaceship called the Audition, where there seem to be only three surviving crew members who are giants. They're like 30, 40 feet
Like
tall.
physically.
Physically, they're getting bigger. They're crunched into these spaces,
Weird.
and they have to keep talking because it's their voices that power the ship. So it sort of starts there and
That
then
is
gets,
fantastically weird.
yeah,
I love that.
it's kind of like Stanislaw Lem by way of
Hmm.
like Beckett or something, but and then it went. I don't want to spoil it again, but it went places I was not expecting, even with that start, to these really interesting threads throughout the book. But I dug that a lot, and then I'm also reading Andre Alexis's collection coming out here, Other Worlds, which is just
Mhm.
flabbergastingly. He's like one of those writers who could just write about like going to the store to buy celery, and I would just have like my jaw on the floor. And then he's doing these sort of like magical realist kind of stories that are just
Oh,
amazing. So
brilliant.
yeah, really
If we're
digging that a
talking
lot.
about collections, I have to like make a plug for Thomas Ha and Uncertain Suns,
I'm snapping my fingers at the camera.
as I got to read that in advanced reader copy in ARC. And I mean, I knew that I
Mm,
adored his work and that
mm-hmm,
it has that edge of bleak eroticism of the mind that
mm,
I am intensely drawn to always, but having a whole bunch of it together in one place instead of I've been reading it in
mm-hmm.
magazines that he publishes in. Um, it's just really striking at how sophisticated and high a level he is working at this point, and I am just like I feel like it's a treasure that we're going to have for a really long time, and I cannot wait to read more. So enormous recommendation for that. I think that's later this year,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone should pre-order it.
Oh yeah, I am eagerly awaiting my copy. I'm jealous you've read it. That's so fantastic to hear. That
So good.
listeners, if you're not familiar, this is Thomas Hawes' forthcoming collection. Is that his first collection? I think.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And with a foreword by ancillary editor Zach Gillens. So yeah, excellent little bonus for the podcast. Let's talk about CJ Cherryh. Let's jump into
Yes.
this. So today we are talking about 40,000 in Gehenna. This was originally published in 1983 by Fantasia Press. It is part of Cherryh's Alliance Union universe, which is a medium-ish future world where humans have begun spreading to other star systems, having some conflicts and developments along the way. This particular novel takes place over a few hundred years as Union settlers begin a new colony on Gehenna, a planet that has fairly Earth-like conditions and a quasi-reptilian, supposedly unintelligent dominant life form. The novel follows the colony as it runs into trouble and then follows it for several generations as new cultures arise there. Like many of Cherryh's science fiction works, this is a novel very much about intercultural contact and sociological development, and it's also playing around with some of the specific topics and themes, such as human cloning, that she set up elsewhere. So, Arkady, I had emailed you out of the blue to talk to you about Cherryh because I had in my brain from an interview I'd read with you or something that you were a Cherryh fan, and I am a huge Cherryh fan. And according to my spreadsheet that I keep running, as of 2025, CJ Cherryh has 81 published novels. Um,
Uh-huh.
out of
A
those,
number I don't think I will ever reach
it's wild. It's like 1.6 per year. I did the math since she started. Out of those, why did you pick 40,000 in Gehenna?
because I didn't pick Citeen.
Hmm.
It's a weird way of saying the thing that hooked me on Cherry first was her invention or conception of the Aze, these programmed clone people
Mm-hmm.
who have a way of life and understanding of the world which is given to them by something called tape, which is kind of like a subliminal instruction manual that is highly mediated by technology. Like my deepest fascination with everything is alien minds that could be human but aren't.
Hmm.
And this is just such an interesting concept, not just of like you run into in science fiction all the time. You have like and there's what this one clone guy and his mind is a copy of somebody else's. No, what if you had a whole society of those?
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated by the idea. I'm also fascinated by the way that Cherry works it as a sociological problem and as a species level ethical and genetics problem. I first encountered this idea and problem as she sets it out in her novel Citeen, which was the first Cherry novel I read.
Mm.
I was about 16 years old and I just picked it up in a bookstore, completely no clue what it was, just
Hmm.
looked cool, thought I'd read it. This explains, along with seeing Sondheim's Assassins at age 11 in a black box theater, also going in cold, a lot about me as a person, as well as a lot about me as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Because wow, did I imprint on that book. And Citeen is a hell of a lot more accessible than 40,000 in Gehenna. Like, I actually can recommend that people who like science fiction in general just should go read Citeen.
Mm.
40,000 in Gehenna is a complicated, worked problem of a book.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily emotionally engaging, though I find it emotionally compelling. But what it is someone picking up all of the tools that Ursula Le Guin left around and using them as hard as she can at that stage of her career. And I love that. And
Mm.
I find it deeply fascinating as a
Mm-hmm.
project. So that's why that one, because it would be too easy to talk about Satie.
Okay. Oh, well, we can work Citeen into this conversation. We go. There's a, of course, I don't remember now who it is. I'd have to look it up. But there was a review or an article about Citeen where one of the things that the author of that piece made was Cherryh is both so good at doing her research and thinking it through, but also so good at not showing it to you that you really can't
Hmm.
tell, like, does she have a PhD in biology? Like, plausible. Does she have a PhD in like computational psychology, which doesn't exist? Plausible. Coming back to Gehenna this time and reading it, I was just thinking about how weirdly it's not totally timeless, but it doesn't feel dated in a certain way that's kind of fascinating.
Hmm.
She uses these terms like tape, but it's not clear that that's referring to like magnetic tape. It could just be kind of slang. A lot of the stuff about how the ASI programming works is like plausible enough to kind of like get into, but not quite enough that you can like pick it apart and debunk
Yep.
it. So it just
It's
holds
such a good
up.
trick.
Yeah. And she just kind of does that at depth.
Yeah. I mean, I actually don't know her academic background or whether she has one. I've always assumed she must. She doesn't need one. It's not important. It's the deep plausibility of the structures that she builds and how they are system based. All of her world building, and sometimes I'm asked to teach world building classes because people, for some reason, think I'm good at it, and I'm like,
Hmm.
no, you can't start from like the archaeology. You have to start from the question. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you want this world to talk about? And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's what I got from Cherry very early on was that the deep structures that she uses to animate the societies she's invented in these books, Alliance Union especially, but also Foreigner, lots of other places, are rooted in the enormous breadth of idea that a discipline can bring, but also the specific depth of looking at one very tiny corner of a
Mm-hmm.
discipline can bring. And again, yeah, you're right about timeless. Tape could be anything. I mean, you get a little bit more detail in Citeen, but the detail is almost unimportant.
Mm-hmm.
It's some kind of hypnotic suggestion. It is mediated by drugs.
Mm-hmm.
What it actually is could be almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that technology, so they're calling it tape. I use the phrase bad tape all the time, which I
Ah.
think I acquired from having older friends,
Hmm.
like a generation older than me. I'm a millennial, but I have a lot of like Gen X friends, and bad tape is slang from
Mm-hmm.
like the 80s,
Yeah,
right?
that's good.
So,
I've sometimes recommended Gehenna if you're going to read one Cherry,
mhm.
if you want to get a sense of the bigger stuff she's doing. Like if you're really only going
Yes.
to read one Cherry, I'd say maybe read Foreigner, maybe read Citeen, some of her kind of like big punchy ones. But what she's doing across her books, which are not like a series per se, but she's doing
It's a
this sort of
universe.
a universe, yeah, and she's doing like specifically this future historical approach of
Hmm.
like not trying to make what happens within that universe too story like, if that makes sense. She's trying to like,
Yeah.
as though it were an extant history and then zooming in on parts of it that are interesting. And usually you have to read a couple of her books to really get that. Like if you read just Citeen or just Down Below Station, you get a very different picture than if you read both of them.
Yes.
And sort of like patching together from different viewpoints what's going on. And Gehenna is one of her only novels that takes place over this long span of time and really jumps around to all of these different viewpoints and give you a sense of kind of what she's normally doing at a multi-book level.
She is using all of the tools of a historiographer, as if she is assembling a history from source documents. Because she's a writer, she's generating the source documents, and
Mm-hmm.
this is a gorgeous trick. In Gehenna, there's narrative sections that are narrated by various characters from various different parts of the political and social landscape, both non-Azzy and Azzy. And there are also crew manifests, genealogical trees, fragments of in-world documents,
Mm-hmm.
some narrative, some not. She makes amazingly complex and important use of dates on those documents.
Mm-hmm.
Like I almost want, sometimes I did on this reread through the book, I almost sat down and did a timeline for myself because it's a completely constructible and coherent timeline,
Mm-hmm.
but it only appears in these little dates, a year and a day in that year that is tagged to each of the fragmentary documents. And these are the tools that a historiographer uses to tell the story of something that has happened in the past and to convey that to the present as a form of narrative. Historiographers use fragmentary text all the time, and like writers, historiographers are constructing a narrative out of parts.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about Gehenna is that you can see the entire project of the Alliance Union universe as if it were there, as if it was quote unquote real, and that Cherryh is an assembler, not an author,
Mm-hmm.
assembling the pieces of a vision to convey the argument that she wants to tell you about a future, as if she had gone there and come back. It's one of the things I love about it. It's also one of the things I think makes it difficult to read.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And it doesn't soft foot it. It starts right off with
Oh
like,
no.
here's like 3 pages of lists
Here's your manifest crew people. You have no idea who they are or why.
and and doing interesting things with moving what is significant or not like on and off the page, because
Hmm.
some of those family trees and manifests give you a bunch of information when people died, when they were born, where people went, and then huge chunks of them like intentionally don't, and you have to sort of decide how much you're going to dig out. We get this really granular
Hmm.
listing of like every non-Aussie member initially on the crew, but then in the last section of the book, we never learn the director's name, who's like a major speaking
Yeah.
character. So it's just like playing with
Yeah.
like what you get and what you don't get.
The depth to which you want to look into these sort of accessory documents depends on what caught you, what was of interest to you as a reader. But it's also both a making available and a withholding of information. Like if you look at some of the family trees, because they repeat and much of the information looks superficially similar,
Mm-hmm.
but they change. What is noted as important is not always the same on those documents.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up flipping back and forth through the book and being like, wait, was this particular gin tagged in a way that I remember from last time, or is it different now? Which brings in this question of the hypothetical compositor of
Mm.
in-world compositor of
Mm-hmm.
that document. Who wrote this down and why and when?
Mm-hmm.
Because the trees are not dated the way that the fragmentary sort of report documents are dated.
Yeah.
There's this entire like historiography universe inside. And then you pull back out to the Watsonian perspective, and Watsonian versus Doylist is a way of
Mm.
interpreting Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Doylist being you start with Arthur Conan Doyle and like how did the author do this thing? Watsonian being only within the universe do you use the information inside the universe and is it plausible in there and what does it mean in there without the authorial direction? So it's sort of like a godless and a godful universe in a
Mm.
way.
Hmm.
But you can do a really Watsonian reading of Gehenna, which is super fun.
Mm-hmm.
But doing that Watsonian reading just makes me more impressed with the Doylist reading because Cherryh is so good. And this is not a late career book. This is an early career book.
I know it's wild. Especially looking at this thinking about this in context of her other work and of like her quote unquote major work like Down Below Station
Hmm.
Satine, that so there's that really odd way where Satine in a lot of like plot, political, and theme ways hinges on Gehenna,
Oh yeah.
but Gehenna hinges on Satine, but it's written 5 years earlier, and nobody in the text of Gehenna knows anything really about what's happening in the world of Satine the novel. I think there's like one or two sections right where we get
There's one passage.
like the admirals or the generals kind of talking about it.
Hmm. There's one of those, and there's the one where like the great betrayal of the Gehennan colonists is revealed,
Yeah.
which is the first emotional huge point in the book for me,
Mm,
which says something about me because it's
hmm.
like that. It's half a page long.
Mm-hmm.
And it just says everything you have just spent a third of a book reading, the struggles of these people, the collapse emotionally, psychologically, and societally of their work, the collapse of this great dream that they have, has all been designed from the beginning, and no one ever cared about them at
Mm-hmm.
all. It's so vicious.
That line, isn't it isn't it by all accounts cheaper than a war? That just like lands.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep.
Tells you everything you need to know about Union society, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. That utilitarian, like
Yes.
utter ability to just reduce people to numbers, and yeah.
Ari Emery's species level ethics later on.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's the big, we probably don't have time to get into it in a podcast that's supposedly about Gehenna, but for me, one of the big hanging mysteries about Satine that fascinates me about it is that idea that Gehenna is the experiment that proves or disproves Ari's work.
Mhm.
But we don't know if Emery knew about the Calibans and how they disrupt the experiment, and we
Yeah.
just don't find out. And I love that just kind of hangs. That's coming back to this, this being an early work of hers, and Cherryh definitely developed and defined more. She was thinking about the Alliance Union universe as she went, because
Mhm.
some of the really early ones, Fated Sun, Hunter Worlds, and those, they're like
Yeah.
supposedly in Alliance Unions, but they feel very different. They're set far in the future of
They're
this stuff.
experiments.
Yeah. But as she gets going, she like hammers out more and more of how this particular time stretch of, I don't know, maybe like 500-600 years goes or something like that.
Yeah.
And we know some of the big things, but he just leaves a bunch of these big questions. One of them being the Gehenna question. I think the other being, in a larger sense, what is happening or going to happen or should happen societally with the Aussie, right? Where
Yes.
you get the Union side and Alliance perspective of them that is close to a totalitarian horror vision, right? Like I'm thinking of like
Hmm.
when the soldiers come on to Down Below Station,
Yes.
that the people there see them as like these like terrifyingly like beautiful mannequins that are all sort of brainwashed and identical,
Uh-huh.
and that like that's what the future is if Union wins.
I have seen the future, brother. It is murder.
Yeah,
To quote Cohen.
yeah. But then you get Satine, and you get speaking narrative viewpoints from us. You get deeper into what's going on with them.
You get Florian and Caitlin and
Yeah.
Satine.
Mm-hmm.
And Florian and Caitlin are terribly complex people
Mm-hmm.
and absolutely Aussie,
Mm-hmm.
like fundamentally a cultural sense.
Yeah. And you get Grant, who like has this. We're just totally talking about Satine now.
Well, we have to.
We have
The
to.
two are the same book. They're two different sides of the
Yeah.
same book.
But you get a character kind of speaking for what could be like, and is in a lot of places, a totally like subservient, denigrated, like second class,
Hmm.
disposable type of person. And then you get a few characters like speaking from that perspective, and in at least one case, actually seeing themselves as sort of superior in a certain way
Yes.
to like the organic, flawed psychology of the born man.
Yes. Like, why would you ever want to be that?
Yeah.
And here's like the part that got me as a very fey, very strange child. I didn't want to be a born man. I wanted
Mm,
someone to recognize me as an
mm,
Aussie when I was 16.
mm-hmm,
That's the identification character for me is Grant. I only figured out that really the bigger problem was that I was identifying way too much with Ari.
mm,
But Ari is hardly a human being either, a
mm-hmm,
normal one. Ari is something else. Ari's
mm-hmm,
a third thing, you know? Because she is also made to be a copy.
mm-hmm.
They're just trying it a different way with
Yeah.
her.
To come back around to the Aussie here, and that, because this book is balancing, I think, some of that, the horror of what they really are. And like,
Hmm.
like, I mean, I think we should be blunt, right? This is a slave
Oh, it's
class
a
that's been
horror. It's an
created.
absolute horror.
Yeah. It's just also fascinating and has this ways that they liberate themselves and become different things throughout that make it fascinating. I know we will talk about the weirds here,
Yeah.
who I think that's just something Cherryh is very interested in broadly, is what happens to the human mind when it's exposed to really different environments and really different cultures and adapts
Yes.
in these dramatic, radical ways.
Hmm.
But I think reading this, there are a few points in particular from Jin One, who is like one of the
Yeah.
Aussie colonists, who's this interesting sort of like he's a tragic character, right? Like
Hmm.
he's never fully aware of what's going on. You know, he's very intelligent in some ways, but he doesn't have a lot of information. He sort of clings to this vision of how things are supposed to work, even after we, the reader, see it's not going to.
Yes.
And there are parts later on when he's dealing with his children. There are parts in the first half of this book that read almost like a horror novel and
Hmm.
have this,
They really do.
it really do, and has this vision of we're on this world, there's something strange that is coming in, and if not literally stealing our children, stealing their humanity. This, you know, that rhymes with a changeling child that I
Yeah.
think bluntly, I think rhymes with autism scares. And
Oh, it
this,
does.
you know, and this vision of like trying to stick to these rules that don't work anymore. Yeah, it feels like a horror movie. Like we have to keep the kids safe
Hmm.
from this thing in the darkness that's coming for them.
But it's already there. It was there when they were born, which isn't the autism scare like
Hmm.
feeling. I mean, on this reread, I immediately thought, oh, these kids who are going to be the ancestors of the weirds, they're just autists,
Hmm.
right? Except that's only part of it. There's another thing going on. Gehenna's from 1983, I think.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So we don't have a lot of autistic people speaking for themselves in 83,
Hmm.
at least people who are whose autism shapes their lives in a really profound way
Hmm.
for themselves in 83. So I give Cherryh a little benefit of the doubt in picking up sort of a societal horror moment and using it
Hmm.
because there's nothing particularly labely there about
Yeah.
the
Uh-huh.
people who are going to be the weirds. I actually think that she's playing with a couple of other weird, deep science fiction things. I'm actually trying to look up the Theodore Sturgeon short story whose name I've forgotten
Hmm.
now, which is absolutely playing with this same idea as well. But really, they should make the International Science Fiction Database easier to search.
I know. I went through this period of about 2 years when I was looking at grad schools, and I was like, do I want to go into library of science specifically to make a short fiction database that would be searchable in a
No.
useful way? And I didn't do it, but I wish someone else had.
Yeah, I wish someone else had too.
Yeah.
So there is a Theodore Sturgeon short story, which is about a bunch of colonists on a foreign planet who, over the course of several generations, their children become sort of a de-evolved, which it's a Sturgeon short story. It's almost fantastical in its nature.
Mm,
Um, but eventually they become like their genetic information is absorbed into the entirety of the planet and the planet reseeds itself. It's
hmm.
actually very beautiful. It's very horrific. But there's some of these deep thinking in science fiction, especially like the new wave stuff of the 60s about what happens to humans under conditions of alien life. And I think
Hmm.
Cherryh is absolutely feeding out of that in the weirds in Gehenna.
Hmm.
And also just thinking about what ways do people adapt.
Hmm.
And I think that's true throughout her entire body of work.
Yeah.
If you put people in really, really strange places that are highly traumatic, they don't always just fall apart. Some of them
Hmm.
do, and she writes those with a great deal of compassion. I had a lot of compassion for Khan, the general of the first colonists in
Hmm.
this read through Gehenna, who seeing the failure, the inevitable failure of the colony, shoots himself before he has to live through it.
Hmm.
But not everybody does that. In fact, the majority of people, they adapt to fantastically horrific stuff
Hmm.
and they become very different. I think the question that Cherry's often asking, and it's a question that is very animating for me as a writer as well, is are those changed folks? Are they human people or are they another
Hmm.
kind?
Hmm.
Still people, absolutely people, but are they human people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the an animating force in Cherryh's work is thinking about these characters who are bridges,
Yes.
these characters who are forced to like stretch across a gap and become something a
Hmm.
little different and look back from the outside. And some of them can rejoin where they come from. Some of them can go all the way over to the other side. A lot of them are in this sort of like double space forever.
Yeah.
And that's a major, major, major concern for her. And I think connects into another thing, which, and this, I don't want to get too much on my hobby horse about this, but I think is that Cherry is really, she's really interested in reality, like capital R, like realism. Like, what is it to
Yes.
engage with the real world and not our mistaken conception of the world?
Hmm.
And I think one of the things that she either believes or is at least using in her fiction to poke at that is this idea that you tend to just keep building up your own model and getting trapped in it. And it's the radical other that can break you out of it.
Yeah. It's the condition of apocalyptic violence that exists at the border of encounter,
Yeah.
because that's the only way to break your own narrative structure of the world.
hmm
I'm trying to think now, is there a Cherry protagonist who does it on purpose?
Hmm.
And I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue, I think you could maybe argue Bren in the Foreigner series, but he doesn't
No.
really know he thinks he knows what
No,
he's doing.
Bren doesn't realize he's done it until he's done it, and then
Right.
it's too,
Yeah.
and Ari is doing it with other people,
hmm
other human people of
hmm
various types, because she's an isolate. So and she's doing it very much on purpose, but she's
Yeah.
not out far enough,
hmm
honestly. Like I always want to introduce Ariane Emery 2 to Elicity from Foreigner and just
Mm-hmm.
see what would
Ah,
happen.
uh-huh.
Some brilliant fanfic writer should do that for me, because that if I did it, it would have to be a book, and you
hmm
can't really do that and get it published without the permission of the author.
There's there's a line in the Faded Sun trilogy when that human protagonist, Duncan,
Hmm.
has made the decision to cross over into this other culture. He's told on the other side, you couldn't have made that decision from over here. Like who you are now could not have decided. There's a sense that like
Yes.
there's always that kind of veil. You can't really know what you're doing when you set out to do this, intentionally or not. And one of the things that I like so much about Gehenna again is that you see this multiple times and for multiple characters
Yes.
and in different ways.
McGee does it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tries to, desperately tries to, and can't quite tries.
Mm-hmm.
Is in some ways prevented by her own cultural structure and her belief in herself as a member of her own culture,
Mm-hmm.
one who obeys the directives of her higher ups, one who engages in what she believes is correct anthropological practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time she is forced to take that completely othering step, she is not as flexible as she might have been
Mm-hmm.
earlier and does not succeed as well as she could have done earlier.
One of the things is note this among Cherryh's works. It's one of her few books that is just packed to the gills with working academics and researchers. So it just
Yes.
has so much great stuff of people like talking and arguing about the theories they're going through. And
Hmm.
for as much as like the first half has some horror elements, it has this almost, I almost get kind of like a Great Russian novel vibe off some of her work in terms of like
Yeah,
the crushing, depressing mundanity of things going downhill.
everything.
Yeah.
And also like the multi-generational,
Yeah.
like dip into somebody's perspective, dip out of it
Uh
again.
huh.
That's very Russian novel.
So like that's in the first half, and then the last third or so where we get McGee and Ally and sort of this main big conflict between these two, Caliban human hybrid societies and these outside
Hmm.
observers watching them, is that first off you get a lot more of this kind of like kind of like rip roaring science fiction contact kind of stuff, but you
Yeah.
also just get these heavy doses of like passive aggressive sniping emails, and these like
It's like being back in an academic department. It's
it's
so
so
familiar.
it's so good, and you don't get much of that in many of her other novels. And
No.
one of the things I love about this is that Genley, who is like the one researcher, and McGee the other, setting up this like actually spoken opposition in a way you don't get in much Cherry. A lot of times
Hmm.
the opposition is kind of just over there. It's the situation. You
It's
don't talk very,
covert
yeah.
or deeply political and therefore covert. Someday I would love to have a conversation with Cherry about what she actually thinks the drivers of major historical moments are,
Mm,
like whether they are located in humans at all,
mm. Hmm.
I am not I'm not sufficiently convinced that she has proven her point either way on that one.
Hmm.
But one of the ways that she works that problem is by locating the motive force of large political events off screen.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting here to both get this sort of like explicit metaphor for that in the Calibans,
Hmm.
in this intelligence that barely thinks at the individual level and thinks at this large like landscape changing level, and that's how they
Hmm.
work. And then also gives us down to these two researchers who hate each other having the
Everything about each other.
email back to the boss. Yeah, it's super super good. And also I think one of the reasons I come back to Gehenna and just love it is I think this is as close as Cherryh gets to being overtly feminist,
Uh-huh.
which is which is always a strange thing for me reading her work, is like looking through
Yes,
how her gender politics works is very strange. And this one, I mean, it's not quite there, but like this feels like a almost an addition to like the core 70s gender science
it
fiction
does.
works
It absolutely does.
in a different tenor and like with a different style and with a different pacing, like on the ground as it were. But like things like the Left Hand of Darkness, the Female Man, like these very much feel like this is in lineage with that in a way a lot of her other stuff doesn't.
Hmm. But I also feel like the style she's using is earlier Le Guin. It's Rokanan's
Mm.
world.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm.
That struck me so hard this time. And it might be because I very recently, like last year, reread Rakanan's
Hmm.
World and all of the like really early Hainish cycle
Mm-hmm.
stuff that Ben was doing, where it feels more like traditional science fiction. Like those are the tools. When I say
Yeah.
traditional, I mean like 1950s, early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that feels like it might as well be a sword and sorcery novel, except
Yeah.
it isn't. It's actually
Planetary
about first
romance kind
contact.
of stuff. Yeah.
Except that's what Gehenna is also.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Especially the last half. Gehenna is also a take on the Dragon Riders of Pern,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
did it for real,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
um, and let it be as completely fucked up as it actually would
Mm-hmm.
be.
Yeah, I mean, specifically when they start calling people dragon riders in like an early
Uh-huh.
80s book, it's like,
Oh,
okay,
it
okay, yeah.
is deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
I love when you can spot what an author is angry about in a
Mm.
book.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what in the field do they disagree with?
Mm-hmm.
Not in a personal way, like not in a, well, yeah, that author over there, I really hate them and I want to like screw with their shit. But there is a argument in this field, a story level craft argument that I profoundly disagree with, and I'm going to show you why.
Hmm.
I love that.
Tell me more. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so like for me, and again, I as a child read the Dragon Riders of Pern books and loved them
Mm-hmm. Same.
because a
Yeah.
child doesn't really they do not hold up for me at all
Mm.
as an adult. They stopped holding up for me in my late teens.
Mm.
Their sexual and gender politics are things I can't get past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then there's the like skillfulness with which they are written, which is not enormously high.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a later problem that one evolves as one becomes
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
practitioner yourself. You stop being able to read things for fun. You start thinking about word
Yeah. Mm.
choice.
Mm-hmm.
The fundamental conceit of the Dragon Riders of Pern universe is that there was a colony on this planet that was profoundly disturbed by what is functionally weather,
Mm-hmm.
as in the rain of thread, which comes from another planet, but is functionally a seasonal period of weather that destroys life. There is a large reptile shaped intelligence on this planet already that humans end up cohabitating with and developing a symbiotic society with that has multiple expressions of how that society should work and lands in a kind of like late 12th century feudalish
Uh-huh.
culture. And they're super fun. Like, and they're kind of written from the point of view of at least the ones that hooked me as a kid from this woman mentally who is like your every girl protagonist with a
Mm-hmm.
special talent. Like she's a musician, she's like can talk to the little dragons and it's all special. So it you don't really start thinking about any of the societal implications of Pern at all
Mm.
as your initial encounter with them if you encounter them at what I think is the age group they're written for, which is about
Mm-hmm.
age 10 to 20.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's just not there. And they're not interested in it. Like when they get into, in the later books, into some sort of like politics, it's very oriented towards individual actors, individual
Mm,
special people, and how they interact with each other.
mm-hmm,
And then the discovery of, oh, this was actually a science fiction novel all along.
mm-hmm,
There is like the technological basis of our society and how we must deal with that,
mm-hmm,
which is about where I lost interest as a
mm,
reader.
mm-hmm.
Cherryh comes in Gehenna with like, well, what if all of that was true, but you actually worked it like a real problem?
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I don't think that's why she wrote it.
Right, right, right.
I think that Gehenna fits into the Alliance Union argument and is just, but I think some of the choices about how she was going to write it are part of that response. Like the Calibans could have been anything. Why
Mm-hmm.
are they reptiles?
Yeah, right.
We could end up calling them anything. Why are we and do we end up calling the symbiotic pairs of Caliban and human dragon riders?
Yeah, right.
That's talking to an active conversation that's happening in the early 80s in science fiction written by women in the
Mm-hmm.
Anglophone arena.
Yeah. No, that's great. And that's really good. I haven't come back to Pern in a long time. I know I'm going to sometime for this podcast, so I'll think about it. But
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of wish I hadn't because
mm,
it didn't hold up for me at all.
it's funny. They're one of the few series I remember aging out of as I read them.
Hmm.
Maybe for similar reasons to you, I'm not sure. But just yeah, like I think like Dragon Song was in like the kids section at my library, and I
Yeah, it
feel like when I was
was.
young, yeah. And then yeah, but 8, 10 years later, reading later, I'm like, I don't know, I just might be done with these. Fascinating. Yeah, I was also thinking with this, these one of the things I like about Cherryh, and she's so prolific, she's written so much.
Hmm.
Part of that is it's not that she's formulaic, but she does have like themes and formulas she comes back to a lot.
Oh
And
yeah, she has a skill set and she is very
yeah,
willing to use it.
and seeing here, this to me feels really balanced between some of her more kind of like one note experiments. Like this feels a lot like a more developed version of Serpent's Reach, which
Hmm.
is also about like big giant aliens that impact human society, and it has Ozzy in it, it has all the same kind of things. And then her more like zeroed in kind of character focused work that I think is where she really
Yes.
shines a little later. And this is just, again, it's just such an interesting balance where it's got both the macro and the micro so much here.
To me, to me, Gehenna is her first mature book.
Mm,
It's
mm-hmm,
the first book where she's figured it out. She has all the tools she needs and she's using them to
mm-hmm.
do what and they do what she wants.
That's good. I think this would be probably a pretty good place to take a quick break.
Sure.
Oh, and I want to send you something. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with the filk based on this?
No.
Yeah, I'm going to send you this. I'm going to send you this song, which has a songwriting credit to Mercedes Lackey. I don't know the whole story on that. There's a whole album based on. I think the album came out in like pre-Citeen. It came out like 84, 85 or something like that.
Sometimes you just want to be able to do the fly on the wall thing, like the people who were your ancestors is a weird word,
Mm,
but like not your genetic ancestors, but the people who were doing the thing that you do 30, 40 years before you're
yeah.
doing it. Because I know that people 30, 40 years in my future will be like, yeah, and Martine and El-Mohtar like hung out and talked about Hadestown.
Uh
Like, what
huh.
is that? Like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I want to go back. I want to know what they were
Mm-hmm.
talking about.
Those traces of the culture, right? And that there's going to be,
Yeah.
and I mean, we're jumping the gun here. I was going to go to break, but we'll go to break in a sec. But one of the things, again, going back this far in Cherryh and like finding these folk songs online is Cherryh, even though she herself, I think, is a fairly like a pretty shy, pretty reticent person.
Mhm.
She has had a very well established fandom
Yes.
around her for a long time
Long time.
and is still active. It's quiet,
Hmm.
but it's still there. And so for me, Cherryh is not only like the science fiction writer that really just sort of like transformed a lot of my approach to how I think about not just science fiction, but to
Oh
other
God,
things.
everything in a
Yeah,
lot of ways.
I don't know if we'll get into like Emmanuel Levinas and Martin Buber in the second half, but that's Cherryh's why I'm into them. But I also discovered her in the early days of the internet, and
Hmm.
so it was also sort of like one of my first glimpses of online community was like the
Yeah.
Dan website, and
Oh,
finding
I'm jealous now.
yeah, and finding that Cherryh, who writes 1.6 novels a year, also blogs like the equivalent of a novel like every month.
Some people just do that. I envy them profoundly. Like,
Hmm.
I just don't have that in me, that kind of output.
Yeah, but I always associate her work with this particular era of fandom, which I want to emphasize is not
Mhm.
dead, but just does
But
feel
it's quiet.
it's quiet and it's not the same as like the sort of like modern contemporary stuff going on right
Yeah.
now.
Well, I didn't grow up in that one, but I grew up in the one that's in between those two.
Mm.
I grew up in live journal fandom.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So in the early aughts,
Mm-hmm.
basically, is where I became a thinking and communicating person on the internet and encountered other fans.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore I have a very complicated relationship to science fiction fandom because it was both like, oh God, these are my people, and also I've never been a fan. I have
Mm-hmm.
always decided to interact with that culture as a practitioner, and that was
Mm-hmm.
a deliberate choice very early on.
Yeah. It's oh, we talk a lot about
Oh
fandom.us,
yeah,
but
there's a ton of
let's
stuff here.
I'm gonna go to break. I'm gonna take us to break and I'm gonna play a little snippet of this when we go to break. I will just catch you in this 1 minute. I'm just gonna grab a drink of water. I'll be right back.
40,000 in Gehenna colonists, so they were told. 40,000 in Gehenna left amid the rain and cold. Union knows another tale. They were meant to die and fail to distract the new alliance. In Gehenna they were sold.
We are back, and I wanted to read this quote on the part of the sort of like horror vibes that goes a different direction. So this is pretty early. This is from Jin's perspective, who's one of the Aussie. Although I should note, it's not in his voice. It's third kind of above him. It's not quite the way he talks. But it says, "The world was full of life, more life than they could hold back with guns or fences. It came into the town at night. It seduced the children, and year by year crept closer." So that's in this
Uh,
part where, yeah, she doesn't get enough credit for her prose on the page.
no, she should. She
Yeah.
so should.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people have come to me and said, but Cherry is so dry and difficult. I'm like, what are you reading?
Mm-hmm.
Slow down a second, listen. Her prosody is exquisite. She doesn't always pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is not the thing she is using to call the reader into the book, but it
Mm-hmm.
is the thing to call the reader's attention to thematic statements,
Mm-hmm.
and they stick with you. One's really good.
I often bring this up, and this is maybe a rabbit hole we won't go down, but I often think about the way that Cherry and Butler are roughly overlapping in
Oh,
times when
that's
they're,
fascinating. Yeah.
and both very consciously working on what you might call like an invisible style, like not trying to be
Hmm.
in your face prose wise, but then both of them have these really resonant passages and imagery, and what they're doing with it is interesting. Anyways, that's a side thought. I'm just going to set that aside.
It's a good one. As someone who, I mean, I will never have an invisible style. It is literally impossible for me.
Mm,
But learning how to employ and it's not flourish, the stylistic capture of the reader's
mm,
attention
mm-hmm,
when necessary, which requires being able to hold off from doing so at other points for
mm-hmm.
it to have its effect. That is, I think, an underrated skill.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, much has been written and discussed about Cherry's third person intense internal, right? Where it's
Oh yeah.
they are. It is a third person narrative most of the time. There's a few first person places, but getting in so close that you just sort of seamlessly slip into someone's head. But an interesting side effect of that is that it makes the main narration, which seems very dry, you never get much of like, I know who the narrator is, and that's
Mhm.
that sort of like detached history kind of approach. But then every once in a while, there are these little flourishes, for lack of a better word, and you remember, oh, someone is saying this.
Oh yes.
But anyways, so I brought that quote in. That's about the beginning when things are falling apart. The Calibans are alien and strange. The people don't know that they've been abandoned and sold out by Union. And then we get these increasing time jumps further down the line. And we sort of learn in bits and pieces that this colony has been ceded to Alliance. And we get these observers and these outsiders coming in watching. And that happens in several waves. The Calibans don't like the first wave. And then we jump ever further down the timeline as these two sort of quasi-Neolithic societies with like a big asterisk because they've remembered a bunch of stuff and also they have a highly intelligent life form helping them out. So it's kind of hard to peg technologically.
Yeah, the Neolithic is the wrong word, and it's one of my
Mm-hmm.
only like academic objections to what
Mm.
Cherryh is doing. But these are agricultural societies with a tech level that's approximately, I don't know, pre-Roman, but they are not Neolithic.
Mm-hmm.
They are much more sophisticated than that. They weave cloth.
Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
That requires a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty stable, multi-skilled society that
Mm-hmm.
is capable of doing that.
We get these two societies that have like rebuilt slightly differently. And this is bringing us what we wanted to hop back into, which is about the gender politics of the book and sort of like what it's doing with that and speaking back to science fiction and just speaking back to
Mhm.
concerns about gender more broadly.
Yeah. So this is the only place where I feel that Gehenna is dated as a book, is the gender politics that is kind of reified into these societies that emerge. One of them, the Styxiders, the Stygians, are led by a young man who is named Jin, like his ancestors before him, and is a highly figured patriarchal society with sort of sworn war bands and shared wives and women relegated to non-political roles
Mm-hmm.
completely. And that is strictly enforced. And it is explicitly figured as being male dominated, including with having the one of our pair of warring researchers that we talked about before being kind of a misogynist prig himself
Mm-hmm.
and fitting in just great
Mm-hmm.
with them.
Yeah.
And that is very clearly marked. Like there's nothing unintentional about that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, the Cloud Towers side, we have what is not exactly like a feminist society, but a sort of realist version of a feminist utopia, like a realist worked version, where you have matrilineal inheritance, though the inheritance is not necessarily all female to female. It's primogenitor mostly, but a much more egalitarian society in terms of gender roles, one which is oriented towards a kind of discussion, collaboration, and their politics are the politics of the council rather than the politics of the warband.
Mm-hmm.
And these two societies are set up as being completely oppositional to each other, that there is an inevitable conflict that is going to happen. In its nature, in its consequences, we do not know, and that's what the researchers are trying to mediate. And of course, the Cloud Tower Society have the female researcher,
Mm-hmm.
McGee, who, while she is not particularly figured as feminine, and there's very little about femininity anywhere in these books, like
Mm-hmm.
at all.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'd say that is true of Cherryh in general,
Mm-hmm.
except maybe in Foreigner, and then the femininity actually belongs mostly to Bren, and that's
Yeah.
a completely different argument, and we can make that later. Bren learns very quickly how to move within the politics of the gaze, and Bren
Mm-hmm.
is a deeply femme character.
Yeah.
I mean that as a high compliment because
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
most diplomats have to be, and it's one of the reasons I write diplomats the way I do. But
Mm-hmm.
different line of thought. McGee, while being female and explicitly marked as such, is female in the way of a female PhD in anthropology in the early 80s who is really pissed off about the fact that that matters.
Mm-hmm.
As she should be, that should
Mm-hmm.
not matter. But it's a kind of genderless womanhood, which is interesting to me.
Hmm.
But nevertheless, female marked as female and associated with the more feminist side of the two societies. What feels dated to me about this setup is the perception of inevitable conflict between a patriarchal, violence-oriented hunter group and a semi-matriarchal, building-oriented feminine group.
Hmm.
And the degree to which the question which I feel like Cherryh is asking, which is, do societies that are very different always have to come into conflict,
Mm-hmm.
which is not a dated question in the slightest.
Mm-hmm.
is framed in what seems to be an ongoing conversation that I was not physically present for. I was born in 1985, after a lot of this had been worked out, not worked out as solved, but worked out as in written. And which means that I, as a reader, only really began to be a person in the mid 90s. So all of this was ancient history to me. But the structure of the insolvable problem being one that is the innate nature of men versus the innate nature of women is one that I find to be the only regressive thing about this book. And therefore it bothers me because I love this book and I always want to like recommend it, including its last bit, which I think has some really profound things to say about the encounter with the foreign, about assimilation, about inevitable conflict, about managing the inevitability of conflict, and also deeply about like heredity and how like, societal or inborn characteristics are moved through generations.
Yeah.
And I just trip over this gender politics over and over again. Where it's like, but not all men are like that, not all women are like that, and there are other things besides men and women.
And it's interesting because like McGee says explicitly in one of her emails something to the effect that I think it's a mistake to make this poll about gender. That it's about how well societies handle people who want to aggressively control others, and that cloud side and stick side have different. But we're given a pair of detestable men, right? We're given Jin and the researcher Genli, which very close to the name of the ambassador in Left Hand of Darkness. Genli is one of my favorite, not overly, but just a caricature of a certain kind of man. Like he's just so well.
Oh yeah, I've met that guy.
Yep.
I've met like 8 of that guy, and they're all like that. That is a real person.
And one of the things that I love about Cherryh is she's so good at showing how context dependent a character is, because you can imagine this guy back in a spaceship, back in a space station, and not turning into what he's allowed to become here, right?
Yes.
Wearing the fringed leather and absorbing into this other culture. There's that bit where Genli's talking to the director about McGee, and is basically saying like, oh, she's a woman, probably can't trust her judgment, and the director says, are you suggesting that people might find something psychologically needful out there? And it just like rocks Genli back, like.
Yeah. It's just like the director's a wonderful character because the director is in some ways the authorial voice, but is also the voice that I believe Cherryh wants the reader to identify with most.
This kind of tempered, considering, willing to push in certain directions. Yeah, But to come back around to this, like, so you have these two kind of caricatures of masculinity, and then you get LA and McGee. And even though the cloud side does feel like this very egalitarian culture, it almost feels like if you would just pick in one male character or one non-female character from that world, the book would read so differently and not like this very simplified binary yin-yang opposition thing.
If I was going to do it, like, I would make Jin a woman, the same person, because that person can be male or female or other gendered. But make Jin a woman as a comparison to Eli, because they are very similar creatures. And if they have a point of deep commonality, you open up a bunch more possibilities for the resolution of that conflict.
Yeah.
One of them is marriage alliance. One of them is inheritance trade. And one of them is guest hostages. And this gets into like the shit I'm interested in. But like, there's so much there. And to me, it feels locked into the inevitable military-based, violence-based conflict because of a belief that societies divide themselves into male societies and female societies.
Yeah. If there's one piece of Cherryh's formula that I don't love, it's the 390 pages of awesome development and then the 10 pages of quick action scene to resolve things, which it just feels like there's so much more to work out here. And it's just kind of like,
I want the action scene, and then I want the other 390 pages of what happens after the action scene, because like the crisis points matter, and Cherryh knows they matter. But if there's a criticism I have of her work in general is that she doesn't write Fallout very well. She tends to skip it and pick up later.
Which is interesting because most of her books in some way are majorly they start with a fallout, but from something else.
Oh yeah. No, she jumps later. Like
Hmm.
Satine is all epilogue.
Right.
Like the whole damn book is epilogue.
Yep. It's all you have received this inheritance of stuff you have to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And its inciting incident, which happens about like got 80 pages in, so still
Hmm.
really rising action. It's not even before we get to the characters who the book is really going to be about.
Hmm.
The inciting incident is the thing that causes the rest of the book, but it's been set up from the beginning, and you can trace back through those 80 pages, is that it's almost as if the event has already happened and the characters in it are reacting off of it backwards in time, which says some interesting stuff about like Ariane Emery.
I mean, do you know oh shoot, what's the book? Jane Allison, Meander Spiral Explode, about like the different
Yes.
shapes. I have never read a book that feels as like spirally as Satine. Like it just feels like
Hmm.
you read it and you're already at the end, but you don't know it. And then as you read, you're going
Yeah.
back, but you're moving ahead.
The
Yeah.
the construction of that book, which is in many ways a more mature piece of writing than Gehenna is, both structurally and character work wise, is I I wonder sometimes if there will ever be an archive that contains early drafts because it
Mm,
cannot be written in order. Or maybe it was, and that's just because Cherryh's mind works like that.
yeah.
But there's like several flashpoint origins for that book, and those, like real historical events, the results of those flashpoint origins move both backwards and forwards in time.
Yeah. Yeah. Like foreshocks and aftershocks, like temporally.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Oh, all right. We've talked about Gehenna. We've talked
So
about
elegant.
13. Yes. I'd love to talk just a little bit before we go about a recurring interest of mine, I think of yours too, of the influence that Cherry has on the field, and sort of if we could like sort of point to what this strain of this style of science
Hmm.
fiction is. And it always does feel kind of strange because Cherry is still writing.
Yeah,
Had a book out last year, and I hate to be the person who's always saying no one's talking about this, because there are people talking about things, but
there are, but it's a hidden, not hidden, hidden's the wrong word. It is an underground strand of influence.
yeah. So I was wondering, yeah, well, you could speak to that in your own influence and other people you read, and where you see kind of like the Cherry influence at work in the field.
So I would consider myself to be a direct descendant lineage wise of Cherry as a writer. There's, of course, other influences, but that lineage didn't entirely come to me directly. There's people in between me and her who I believe are also equally influenced in some ways. I'm thinking specifically here of Elizabeth Bear, who
Mm-hmm.
writes very similar sociologically complex and where the sociology is load-bearing
Mm-hmm.
science fiction. She calls them comedies of ethics.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's actually a fair description of a lot of the work that Cherry does as
Mm-hmm.
well. And also of a lot of my own work, though we are very different writers. There is a lineage, and it is a lineage that has not entirely, but in a large part been carried by women or gender nonconforming people
Mm-hmm.
in the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s in science fiction, and in some ways became suddenly visible in the second half of the 2010s.
Mm.
And I would say that this is basically Anne Leckie and then me, and also maybe Tamsin Muir.
Uh-huh.
Maybe there's other influences there that seem to supersede for me, like
Mm-hmm.
Vandermeer, which is not a bad thing at all. Anne Leckie and I have often been asked whether we are reacting off of each other's work.
Mm-hmm.
Not. We did not know each other until well, she had published the first two-thirds of the Ancillary Justice series,
Mm-hmm.
and I had finished and sold A Memory Called Empire, though it had
Okay.
not yet come out. I mean, we knew of each other, but we had never talked, we had never hung out.
Yeah, yeah.
We became friends as a result of both talking about the same thing. And the thing we are both talking about is CJ Cherry.
Mm-hmm.
We have explicitly had this conversation, including the naming practices. So the protagonist of the ancillary books is Breck, which is I have from Anne a takeoff on Bren of Foreigner.
Okay.
My secondary aliens in A Memory Called Empire are the Ebrekti, which are directly from the same. Yeah, it's the same idea. We're all playing in the same sandbox, and we're all reacting off of the constructs that Cherryh has given us,
Mm-hmm.
the sense of focus on interiority to tell a sprawling sociological story
Mm-hmm.
and answer a sprawling sociological question. The idea of the worked problem. What's the question that animates this? What's the issue that you're trying to solve in the story? But also some like little things, little fascinations. The thing with tea in the ancillary books and
Uh-huh.
the gloves and a bunch of my stuff about there's an invented world comic in my books called The Perilous Frontier, which the protagonist is basically doing all of the things that happen in the Foreigner books,
Mm-hmm.
which people who've read both can figure out, but is kind of a send up. So there's a lot of coded or not coded influence there. For me, the biggest influence that Cherryh has had on me is actually in writing deeply interior paranoid characters who are
Uh,
nonetheless active in the world, which I think is a special skill and one which once I figured out how to do it well by watching Cherryh do it well, made my writing actually accessible to people
hmm.
as opposed to just claustrophobic.
Hmm.
But it doesn't start with Cherryh either. Like I meant it about Le Guin,
Mm-hmm.
that there are tendrils that reach backwards and forwards from the work that Cherryh is doing in the early and mid 80s to set up the sociological problems of Alliance Union.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think there's a connection to Lois McMaster Bujold in a sort of sideways way,
Yeah.
which I'd love to think about more. I haven't thought through that. It just feels right. There's also deep connections to people like Seth Dickinson and the Trader Barrett Cormorant,
Yeah.
and in some other ways to like people working in a very different mode, like Max Gladstone,
Mm-hmm.
but who are using the speculative fiction rule set to talk about a sociological concept or problem.
Yeah. I mentioned this in our episode on Trader Barrow, but that line in that about remembering that there's other players on the board and this like
Uh-huh.
this approach to thinking about story as a history that has many players with their own aims and goals running around and you're just getting part of it is such a
Hmm.
specific approach. And I think the interesting one of the interesting things for me is looking at Cherryh's influence today and looking at stuff like your work, stuff like Lucky's work, is that there's this I don't want to say stereotypically male, but there's this tradition of space opera that's kind of about like how big a thing can we blow up, and that's like the main reason we're kind
Oh
of doing
yeah.
space opera. And then there's Cherryh's tradition, which I should point out, like is very good at the nuts and bolts stuff. Like she's like
Oh yeah.
includes like diagrams of like how the ships are rotating. Yeah. And some of her books I think lean heavily into that to good effect.
Mhm.
But she's sort of using that tool set not as an end in itself, but to
Yes.
do something like what Le Guin was doing in the Hainish books. We can do that and ground it in this even bigger, more sprawling, maybe leaning a
Hmm.
little more into the quote unquote science fictional realism of it in kind of a different
Yes.
way. And to me, that is when I'm hungry for like a book that has like spaceships and aliens in it, like that's what I'm looking for. Like, what are you doing
Uh-huh.
this for? And Cherryh provides such sort of a template of how to do that. Like take
Yes.
that tool set, but then do this other thing with it.
I absolutely agree. If I write spaceships the way I do, it is because Cherry told me I could. That like that setting can be a place to do incredibly sociological and intercharacterly rich work,
Mm-hmm.
without it not being also about the cool shit.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, for me, yes, the character work is also the cool shit, but part of the cool shit is and what if I had a relatively self-sustaining rice-based culture on a spaceship that could hold onto its own supply chain for a good year or 2 years? What would that look like?
Mm.
What would grow up around that? What would happen if you dumped weird pests into it and people liked them? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, all of this is subtext in A Desolation Called Peace, but it's all there because I needed it. It's all there because it shapes the society that I wanted to play around in.
There's that, really, really classic sort of science fictional definition of extrapolation and sort of asking what if. And
Hmm.
I feel like part of what what I'm pointing to, what we're pointing to maybe with this other tradition, this sub-tradition that Cherryh is a strong exemplar of, is not just saying what if, answering it and then being done, but they're like, well, what if then? Well, what if then? Well, what if then?
Yeah.
And continuing to pull it out. And there's so much science fiction that just sort of says, what if this? And sort of gives you one big splashy thing. But to actually like use it to inform like a whole fabric of what's happening.
Well, I feel like it's the difference between thinking of science fiction as the genre that says what if with technology when you mean technology in the material sense, and science fiction as a genre that says what if with technology when what you mean is techne in the Greek sense, as in art, the art of making something, and politics is techne, education is techne, weaving, military might, things that explode, pen and ink, all of that techne. Like, what if? Can we build something there? And then a willingness to go big on scope also, which I find intensely brave as someone who tries sometimes and fails sometimes to do that.
Oh, this is really good. I'm so glad you picked this one. This pointed to so many things. We could probably keep talking about this for
Oh, yeah.
I have so many notes that I can get to. I want to track down whether or not Cherryh's use of the specific phrase pattern language is a reference to a pattern language or not.
Yes.
I really want to know.
I'm assuming yes. I've always thought yes.
Because that's late 70s, so it would track. But
yeah. I mean, things that have pride of place on my bookshelves. It's probably somewhere in this mess behind me.
Nice.
I also found the Sturgeon story I was talking about
okay.
earlier. It's called Helix. It's actually earlier than I thought it was. It's 1956. Definitely something that Cherryh could have read.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing I think about reading someone whose career starts in the late 70s and then continues for quite a while, is you find these odd threads to unexpected bits of it. The sword and sorcery and planetary romance thing, like recurring unexpectedly alongside this very, like, I don't know, like Briny, Vingy, classic space opera kind of stuff. And just, yeah, anyways, we could talk about Cherryh all day, but we should wrap this up. We didn't even talk. I had so many notes we didn't get to. That's okay. We talked about Pern. We talked about Aziz. Before we get going, is there anything else you want to share with people about anything you're working on or things coming up or where people can find you?
Well, people can find me mostly on Blue Sky, where I am byzantine.bluesky.social. That's spelled like Byzantine as if it was French and feminine. That's where I'm mostly online these days. I have a defunct newsletter that at some point I should restart up. I am working on several projects, none of which I probably am legally allowed to talk about because none of them are done. One of them, however, is called The Trace, and it's kind of a spy novel. If you ever wanted to see me try my hand at a science fantasy, here we go.
Cool.
So we'll see how that works out. And I do encourage you to go get Rose House, which came out in wide release in this past March 2025, where it was not very available before, but now you can go buy it in hard copy if you want to have me talk to you more about alien minds and architecture, if that's what you got out of this conversation.
Yeah, no, listeners, pick up Rose House. It's really, really good. It made me check out a bunch of books on Louis Kahn, so thank you. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for talking about Cherryh, one of my favorite authors, and a delight to dive into it a little bit. Yeah, hope to catch you around the scene sometime. Take care.
Absolutely. You too.
Connect here to these routes 54, 495, and 686. Please take your belongings with you.
So I went to 4th Street Fantasy for the first time. 4th Street is a small convention in Minneapolis focused on fantasy fiction, which they do note includes science fiction as a subset of fantasy. It seems like it has a lot of crossover and resonance with the Viable Paradise Writing Workshop folks. And I was also seeing a few familiar faces from WisCon. That's the feminist SF con in Madison that's very important to me. It's been on a quasi-hiatus or online for a few years now, so it's been good to see a couple people around. 4th Street is very focused on panel discussions. So 4 or 5 speakers, one of them moderating, talking largely extemporaneously on a predetermined topic, and not on the many other kinds of activities you might find at other cons. So gaming sessions, author readings and signings, music performances, cosplay, that kind of thing, which I think for a small con is very cool. They're putting their energy just into the conversational side. 4th Street is small enough that they monotrack it, meaning that there's only one item on at a time, so you don't have to decide what to go to and conversely what to miss. And it makes for this continuing thread of ideas throughout the convention with everyone kind of on the same page, which I thought that was cool. So yeah, nice convention. I was glad to see that they were using pretty good COVID protocols, and the con runners did a great job of communicating with everybody about what was going on throughout the convention. They had a team keeping Discord updated with book mentions and panel recaps, so that was cool. I was on one panel, which was sort of about criticism, which I thought went pretty well. And I really enjoyed 4th Street's tradition of a final panel that is constructed on that day using ideas that have been floating around throughout the previous days, which is just a fun tradition. In this case, it was about time loops and repetition in storytelling. Pretty interesting. The physical setup of the convention, with easy access to outdoor spaces and a surprisingly good range of food options in walking distance, that made for a lot of good conversations outside the actual programming as well. And a lot of the memories that I'm actually going to take away from this were mostly book conversations that happened just sitting right outside the hotel. This was also my first time in the Twin Cities, which turn out to have a pretty robust public transit system, so good job there. I got to do my favorite mode of touring, which consists of sprinting between various coffee and bookshops looking for rare gems. I got a few extremely good coffees, starting at a place called Wesley Andrews on my way out to the hotel on the first day.
That's a coffee roasted by Hart in Portland from Wheeler, Colombia. It's just the last of it. It's like probably in the sweetest spot. So beautiful. I love Hart coffee.
No, they're great.
To me, it's like, yeah.
Would you mind telling me the name of your shop and your name?
Oh, yeah. I'm Lucy Smith, and I work with Wesley Andrews.
Wesley Andrews it is?
I had some good coffee talk with Lucy at Wesley Andrews, who also pointed me towards some other places in Minneapolis to check out. Briar Cafe was extremely good, by the way. And then on Friday, I had a couple of mind-blowing coffees at S.K. Whittier.
We're at SK Coffee. My name's Carter. We're drinking a Chiroso from Colombia and a Black Diamond Natural from Costa Rica, from Alajuela. They essentially lay the coffee cherries a lot thicker than they normally would, and then they move them around a few times a day it extends the drying period from what would be about a couple weeks to about a month. It's just more fermentation going on in the processing.
Thanks so much. That's perfect. Yeah, this is really tasty. It's really fruity.
That Black Diamond Natural was pretty mind-blowing. Intense aromatics, but none of the funkier fermenty aspects that I would have expected. Just sweet and complex as all get out. Very, very good. Probably the best coffee I've had this year. I also grabbed a couple nice shots here and there. I walked a couple miles in the rain for a Bogart's donut, the brown butter glazed one that everyone talks about. Listen, I'm not going to give you the whole spiel right now, but if you think I'm a book or a coffee snob, you have not seen me around donuts. And it was fine. It was perfectly fine. Oh, and I also had a nice tea experience at Northeast Tea House. I got a Hairy Crab Anche Oolong with a full gong fu setup. They had fellow kettles built into the tables. I could go on, but I should probably steer this back around to books. Unfortunately, with the timing of my trip and the convention programming, I didn't get to as many bookstores as I would have liked. I'm really bummed I didn't make it to Milkweed's brick and mortar because that's just super cool. But the few I did make it to had superb selection, talking specifically about Dreamhaven and Uncle Hugo's. I got some Delaney first editions I've been hunting for, another copy of my single favorite Cherryh, that's Wave Without a Shore if you're keeping track, and I found the Subterranean edition of Egan's Phoresis, which is really, really cool find. Bunch of other cool stuff as well. Probably just as well I was walking around and had to keep my book purchases reasonable. And that was my trip. 4th Street was pretty nice, not stressful. I had some great conversations with folks. I hope to return. My summer, after a long year of hermit-like isolation, seems to be just packed with conferences and conventions. There were just a bunch that were either easy for me to get to or felt kind of important to get to, so I'm doing a whole bunch over the next couple months. So stay tuned for some more con reports from me, hopefully with some more interviews and on-the-ground recording, but we'll see how it goes. But thanks for listening to this, and now, credits. Amal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism, with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Barcha Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabrielle Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. Big thanks to our transcribers, Kate Dollarhyde and John W.M. Thompson. The song clip I played in the break is from 40,000 in Gehenna, performed by Kathy Moore and Catherine Cook, written by Mercedes Lackey and Leslie Fish, off the album C.J. Cherryh's Finity's End and Other Songs of the Station Trade. There's a nice quality version of that on the Internet Archives I'll put a link to in the notes. Thanks Rocketman0739 for uploading that. Good job. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is very cool of you. Go to patreon.com/ancillary review to become a backer. Come hang out with us on Discord. If you heard us talk about a book and you want to buy that book, check out our show notes for a bookshop link. We get a cut. Questions, suggestions, pedantic notes about things we got wrong? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com. I wanted to work this in the conversation of the episode somehow, and it just didn't come up somehow, or I caught it. I'm not sure what happened. But if you want to hear another great science fiction writer who's been influenced by Cherryh talking about Cherryh's work, I really recommend the Wizards vs. Lesbian episode on Foreigner with Ann Leckie. It's really, really good. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Next time, we are staying in space. We are staying in science fiction. We're talking about Ian M. Banks' Accession with award-winning critic and reviewer Abigail Nussbaum. If you want to read ahead, check out our website. We've got some cool stuff coming down the line. Thanks for listening. Stay critical out there, and don't forget to vote for the Hugos and the Ignites.